Faith in America. Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Faith Nation. In Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. We begin tonight with a simple display of faith that set off a firestorm over the First Amendment. You might remember the name Joe Kennedy. His court case about prayer and high school football won a major religious freedom victory at the Supreme Court. CBN's David Brody was there for Coach Kennedy's final Friday Night Lights.
It looked like your normal Friday night high school football game in America, with one major exception. After enduring an 8-year fight for his right to publicly pray after games, a Supreme Court decision put Joe Kennedy back on the sidelines. And that ruling meant he could exercise his First Amendment right to pray. And here's the moment just minutes after the game ended. Afterwards, the coach told a throng of waiting reporters what he prayed.
I said thank you probably 30 times. And I had no other words. What do you say to the one who got me here to begin with? What we asked for from the Supreme Court and all the courts was just to be able to be a coach and to be able to pray after a football game. What an awesome way to come back after an 8-year battle.
The city of Bremerton, Washington is Coach Joe Kennedy's boyhood home. He loves this place. It's both picturesque and blue collar, and it's that hard scrabble approach that is needed to fight this 8-year ordeal.
It has not been easy. Victory came with pain and suffering, even threatening his marriage.
We're about to get a divorce over all of this because I'm putting my wife through hell and she's crying every day.
That's because his wife Denise was the head of HR for the school district that her husband was fighting against. A tough spot for sure.
I was so angry at him. I spent a lot of time being angry because I didn't understand his intention. I questioned his intention. I lost friends over this. And those people I worked with for 15 years, and I loved them.
You felt overwhelmed, you were drowning.
Absolutely. That's a really good way to put that. Like, how do I balance this? How do I do my job, be a wife and a mother?
So 1 year into the legal battle, their marriage hit rock bottom. Then God opened Denise's eyes.
I realized that God is in this. It's not my husband. It's not my husband's desire for center of attention for this situation. It is God. God called him to such a time as this.
And that led to a greater breakthrough.
And to walk on that same narrow path together, it's, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. And that is what's got us through this.
And so what's next for Coach Kennedy? After 8 years away, the coaching environment is not the same.
As much as they have accepted me, still I feel like I'm kind of the outsider and still on, kind of like on enemy grounds, and I don't like that feeling. Yeah. It doesn't have the same feeling that it did. The school district and this lawsuit took a lot of the joy out of coaching. It took away just about everything that meant something to me.
It was noticeable. During the game, there would be long stretches when Coach Joe was all by himself, something we discussed after the game.
That clearly seemed purposeful, or if not purposeful, there was meaning behind some of that.
I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should answer that.
So while he fought for years to get back, questions about his future are now up in the air.
I don't know how long God's going to have me here. I have to talk this over with God. I got to talk it over with my wife, my family. There's so many variables with this.
Whatever happens, he's confident of one thing for sure.
I finished the race, and I hope God is kind of looking and smiling, and he's proud that I did what he's called me to do.
David Brody, CBN News, in Bremerton, Washington.
Thank you, David. Coach Kennedy has since resigned from his role at the high school where he first made headlines. Coming up, a new school curriculum designed to help students bone up on their first freedom as Americans, religious freedom. You're watching CBN's Faith Nation. Welcome back. Before freedom of speech or freedom of the press, one freedom stands first: religious freedom. Now, a new high school curriculum is helping students learn all about it. Jennifer Wishon reports.
In the list of rights enjoyed by Americans before speech, before the press, and the rights to assemble and petition, the founders placed religious freedom at the very top. While many scholars describe it as the foundation for all other human rights, more and more religious freedom in America is under attack.
You know, if you look at the history of the U.S., there wasn't a single challenge at the high court level to religious freedom for the first 100 years.
Yet today, religious freedom is a regular topic at the high court. For the last few years, the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty has kept an index on American attitudes about this First Amendment protection.
Most Americans they knew about the freedom of speech. That was popular, but less than half were familiar with the freedom of religion being protected in the First Amendment. So I think that shows there's a real opportunity for maybe education on that issue.
And that's really where America's First Freedom curriculum plugs in.
Once focused exclusively abroad, the Religious Freedom Institute now spends half its time promoting religious liberty here at home and sees educating students as key to maintaining strong protections.
We want to provide a pathway that encourages them to be confident, to understand religious freedom, to talk about it, and to live out their faith in the public square. That's what our founders intended.
America's First Freedom high school curriculum is written to comply with national social studies standards. It's 5 lessons designed to supplement U.S. history, world geography, and political science classes. A version for middle school students will be released this year, and plans for elementary students are in the works. The goal is to arm next generation leaders with knowledge about the one freedom that protects conscience, allows Americans to live out their faith, and makes the nation stronger.
And yet what I'm finding at all levels of education is a fear, an insecurity of talking about religion. Well, it's obvious from our First Amendment, the founders were not fearful about talking about religion or about placing religion and religious freedom at the core of our democracy. We need to be talking about it in our classrooms, and yet we're not.
David, what did the founders understand about religious freedom that led them to put it at the top of the list of the Bill of Rights?
I think the founders understood religious freedom to be critically important for all other human rights. And they also understood that religious freedom plays a central role in supporting other societal goods.
Countries that strongly protect religious liberty are more peaceful and economically stable, which benefits all citizens. Derringer Dick says even if an education gap exists, their latest information shows Americans have good instincts in this area.
But ultimately, religious freedom isn't, no freedom really is going to be able to be exercised fully and vigorously if there isn't some kind of popular support for it.
Even when asked questions about controversial issues, Americans sided with religious expression.
Like one question was about a website designer who's asked to host a website for a same-sex wedding, but that's against her religious convictions, and so she declined. So we asked several questions along those lines, but we split the sample. So we asked 1/3 of the people in the example we gave them. It was a Jewish website designer. And then 1/3 it was a Christian, and then 1/3 it was a Muslim. And what we found was we got about the same response. It was around, if I recall correctly, around 70% of people who supported the website designer, regardless of their religious belief.
Still, Beckett's index shows Gen Z, Americans 26 and under, are the generation least supportive. Just 46% have tolerance and respect for different beliefs in God. Do you feel like in some ways you're up against the clock?
Jennifer, I think we are up against the clock. There seems to be a willful disregard of fundamental principles of our democracy, fundamental principles of truth, and the critical role that religion and religious freedom play in society. If we lose religious freedom at home, if it's compromised at home, then we're certainly going to lose it around the world.
Now the Religious Freedom Institute is working to expand its curriculum across the board into public, private, and home schools across the country. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Thank you, Jennifer. And up next, for the first time since the Cold War, the Navy is expanding its chaplain corps. What's behind this push for spiritual readiness? The Pentagon addressing a new need in our armed forces, what one leader calls spiritual readiness. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke explores the growing demand for chaplains in our military.
For the first time since the Cold War, the Navy is expanding its chaplain corps. This year alone, the goal is to fill 70 active duty slots, a number that would place one chaplain on board every destroyer.
A lot of the bad behaviors, a lot of the evidences of stress are reduced on ships, in units that have chaplains.
Rear Admiral Gregory Todd serves as the Navy's Chief of Chaplains, a position that also covers the Marine Corps and Coast Guard. Over the course of his career, Todd has worked as a chaplain in all three branches, responding to Ground Zero after 9/11 and deploying to both Iraq and Afghanistan.
The funny thing about being a chaplain is the most satisfying moments are in some of the most challenging times, because you're there to bring God into that situation.
With growing mental health issues threatening service members across the board, Todd says chaplains can be the tip of the spear.
We become often first responders for them as they experience some of these stress issues. Some of them are normal stressors of life, and we can help them and normalize those things. But we also work with our partners in the mental health world when something becomes a lot more serious than just a normal stressor.
According to research from Columbia University, Duke, and Harvard, those engaged in spiritual practices are 50 to 80% less likely to die by suicide and 60% less likely to suffer depression. Todd says the Pentagon's decision to grow the chaplain corps is part of an effort to better care for people, a new emphasis on what he calls spiritual readiness. Now it's up to him to fill the vacancies, and he's counting on a new generation to answer the call. While a chaplain at Emory University, Lieutenant Commander Saul Burleson says God put military ministry on his heart.
When I looked at the men and women in uniform, what I found was people who were committing their lives to something greater, something greater than themselves. They were serving the Constitution. They were upholding and defending our inalienable rights.
Burleson now serves as a Navy chaplain on the USS Macon Island. While his sailors are similar in age to the college students with whom he once worked, the job responsibilities look quite different.
We're embedded with our sailors, our Marines, our Coast Guardsmen. We serve all the sea services and the men and women in uniform in those, wherever they're at, on board a ship, across the Atlantic or Pacific, with the Marines in a desert or in the Arctic. We're with them wherever they are.
Sometimes I would joke, I'd say, my job is to hang out with you guys as you do your job. But the reality is you're there to spend time, to tell stories, to go to the motor pool, to be there. And then in that life connection, transformation begins to take place. Someone needs time. People go, hey, chaplain, you got a minute? The answer is always yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Moore is an Army chaplain. After years deploying with soldiers, he now serves as a recruiter for the chaplaincy school at Fort Jackson. As the branch with the largest chaplain corps, Moore says the Army isn't looking to grow, but rather to maintain.
We're looking at recruiting the best qualified. Really, we're looking at about 300 each year. But when you think about all of the qualifications, it is hard to find the best qualified to continue to serve.
Military chaplains are required to meet the same age and physical fitness standards as any other service member. Plus, there's educational requirements, which include a bachelor's degree, a master's in divinity or some area of religion, and then professional ministry experience.
Soldiers give up an awful lot, but they shouldn't have to give up their faith. So we want the best qualified chaplains of all different faith groups.
Second Lieutenant Michael Engelstjert is a candidate at the Army's chaplaincy school. He felt called to minister to soldiers after his own military service. As he goes through the chaplaincy program, he's learning to view the men and women he serves alongside in a much different light.
You know, it's a very different role. And as I'm learning things in seminary and learning about what ministry is, it's like I'm in the same places doing something completely different. And being able to draw on that experience while still having to get used to the new lens of what it means to be a chaplain.
3 decades into his career, Admiral Todd calls caring for the men and women of the armed services a sacred honor and privilege.
I said, okay, Lord, I'll do this for 4 years. I'll do one tour, and that's been over 30 years ago. This flock has a way of getting under your skin. And so then the prayer turned to, Lord, I'll do this as long as you need me to do this, because I love doing it and I'm happy to do that. But I can't decide when to go home. You have to tell me. And so I'm still here until the Navy says, okay, now you have to go home. You're too old. You have to go home now.
While the Navy is currently asking for 70 additional chaplains, Todd anticipates need for even further growth. And the Marine Corps and Coast Guard are expected to follow suit. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Caitlin. Well, what happens when the Holy Spirit hits Auburn University? Still ahead, the spiritual transformation happening on campus. Finally tonight, across America, an outpouring of the Holy Spirit is sweeping college campuses, and that includes Auburn University. Here's CBN's Abigail Robertson.
When Christian leaders decided to organize a worship night called Unite Auburn, they had no idea how many people would actually come. The amazing turnout resulted in around 6,000 students filling Auburn's Neville Arena and some 200 being baptized.
It was such a move of God.
I don't have words. Anyway, there's all these students coming to get baptized.
Jenny Allen, Christian author and founder of the If Gathering, spoke at the event.
There is something very special happening right now, I believe, in their hearts. I think they are hungry for God and they want God in a very real way. This is not manufactured.
Allen tells CBN News as the event came to a close, one student asked a pastor next to her if she could be baptized.
So I go up on the stage. It was that fast. And I said, hey, there's somebody that wants to get baptized tonight. Would anybody else want to trust Christ and be baptized tonight? And dozens of hands were raised all over the arena, and it was wild.
But it is because of Jesus.
The group moved to a lake about a mile from the stadium and started streaming into the water to receive Christ. Some joined friends, like this group of fraternity brothers.
We didn't just baptize them. We got to hear their stories, and they got to tell us why they wanted to do this tonight. And so many of them were just tired of the darkness that they were living in. They wanted Jesus, and they wanted a different way to live. And it was so sincere. It was so sincere. You can see it in their eyes.
CBN News recently spoke with Christian author Madison Pruitt-Trout, whose family was involved in organizing the event.
It was just so amazing, and so many coming, to us saying, hey, I just want to be clean. I just want to be pure. And so many rededicating their life, dedicating their life, and just saying, hey, I don't want to follow the world's way anymore. Like, I want to go all in with Jesus.
What do you think God is doing in Gen Z?
He's pouring out a spirit, like it talks about, in Scripture. And we're seeing, I believe we're living in, the end times, and you're seeing his spirit be poured out, and, people coming to see God for the first time in a new light that's beyond religion, beyond tradition, and say, man, I want this God who radically saves and transforms. And it's so cool to see.
The event's impact even led prominent atheist group, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, to demand Auburn put a stop to religion in its athletic programs. The letter called the presence of Auburn's football, baseball, and basketball coaches unconstitutional and inappropriate. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey fired back in a statement, saying we will not be intimidated by out-of-state interest groups dedicated to destroying our nation's religious heritage.
This generation, yes, they may be on paper seemingly not attending church and seemingly not walking with God. But that is prime for revival. So I think it's affecting the world. Most of them have lived a pretty non-God existence prior to these moments. And so when you see this happen, I think it moves all of us.
Allen described the unique reaction when she first reached out to Gen Z in 2018 at Texas A&M.
There was just probably 2,000 people there, and they began to stand up and yell out their sin in front of their roommates, in front of their friends. They were yelling out things like suicidal thoughts and sex addiction and alcohol abuse and all of these things that they were just screaming out in front of their friends. And I thought something is different. They wanted God more than they wanted approval from their friends. They wanted God more than they wanted to be accepted and respected.
Allen says while these moves of God all look different, one thing they have in common is this next generation's real and genuine desire for Jesus.
I think it's because of the darkness, the anxiety, the depression that they've battled. And so, they're looking at Jesus and they're saying, I want forgiveness. I need forgiveness. I want what he's offering. And I really don't care what other people think. And it's powerful.
She adds, for those hoping to see this in their church and college campus, the formula is simple and remains the same. Pray.
I'm not surprised that after that night happened, I had a group of girls reach out that had been praying by the lake, of all places, that we baptized. And they had been praying on Fridays and leading worship and asking God to move. So I believe it starts with prayer.
This year, CBN News has reported on multiple mass baptism events all over the country that don't appear to be slowing down. Both Madison and Jenny credited local churches as key to the success at Auburn. Their support, presence, and leadership allowed them to be there for students eager to receive Jesus and help disciple new converts as they begin their walks with the Lord. Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thank you, Abigail. And that's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.